And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube reading guide series. Today is the fifth in a 14 video series walking through the correct reading order of Superman by DC. To create this reading guide, I have read the 1700 comic issues that comprise the shared Superman continuity from 1991 when Man of Steel launched, all the way up until 2011 when Flashpoint happened. That includes all spin-offs, tie-ins, miniseries, and events, and I've used that knowledge to build this, the internet's most detailed reading guide for the world's most famous superhero. This guide takes the form of a Google Sheet that I've split into 14 tabs, which represent the 14 discrete eras I've split this period of Superman reading into. This guide can be viewed and downloaded for free from my website. Generally, each era or tab is separated by a major DC event that I will also be releasing a separate video on. This playlist will contain every Superman video and every DC event in chronological order. However, if you're only interested in the DC events, they will also be collected in a dedicated 11 video playlist that is available separately on my YouTube channel. Final bit of admin, please do watch the introductory video for this series. It explains a whole bunch of things, including why I start this guide in 1991 and not before then, and also explains terms like Type P reader and Type J reader, and a couple of continuity-based things that I think are quite important to understand as well. So, with no further ado, let's have a look at the guide. Here is the fifth era. Now, last time we covered the final night DC event in a dedicated video, and before that we covered the fourth era, which is the tab prior to this. The fourth era was February 1996 to November 1996, and so that was the issues between Underworld Unleashed up until Final Night. Today we're going to be covering 46 issues from December 1996 to October 1997, which takes us from the Final Night event up to the Genesis event, which is where we're going to finish out today. So remember, as you go through this, please read from the top down, so line by line. So for example, here, even though I'm selecting this cell here, it would be number 118. That would be the issue to read. And then literally line by line, each line only has one issue on it. And line by line, as we go down, read the issue on that line. It'll be very straightforward once you've downloaded the Google Sheet. As you can see here, if I hover over a particular cell, it says the triangle number for the cell. If you don't know what triangle numbers are when it comes to Superman issues, do watch the introductory video because it's a really key part of trying to arrange your Superman reading. So no further ado, let's start off with the first arc of this era. I call this Honeymoon in Hawaii. The first issue, as we can see, is issue 118 of Superman. And then the issue after that is not an issue that's in any of these four series. It's a standalone single one-shot issue called The Wedding Album. Now, it's clearly part of the Superman continuity because it's got Triangle 47 here. I could say it's preceded by Triangle 46 and it's succeeded by Triangle 48. But let's have a moment and just talk about The Wedding Album. This was an insanely compact issue wrapping up the entirety of a 60-year courtship between Clark Kent and Lois Lane. I'm going to talk about it briefly here, as briefly as I can, but strap in, it's going to take a couple of minutes. There's a couple of weird Easter eggs in this issue for a start. Before I forget, I should point out the priest who performs the wedding ceremony is a nod to Jerry Siegel. In addition to his actual artwork of what it looks like being modeled on Siegel, he takes the name Herbert Fine, which is actually the pen name, Herbert S. Fine, that Siegel used when he first published The Reign of the Superman, which was the first story to use the name Superman. If you're wondering who Jerry Siegel is, Siegel, along with Joe Shuster, created Superman way back in the 1930s. Enough gossiping. What is this issue about? Well, this is obviously the wedding between Clark Kent and Lois Lane. Now, interestingly, Superman's wedding had originally been intended to occur much earlier. It's actually been on DC's schedule ever since Clark revealed his identity to Lois in Action Comics number 662, which is actually before I start this reading guide. However, the schedule has been changed several times in both directions, by which I mean there were times they thought they would have the wedding earlier and there were times they thought they'd have the wedding later. One of the key factors that's easy to forget here is that these comics were coming out at the same time as the live-action television series Lois and Clark, which was also called The New Adventures of Superman. This is the one with Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. Now, the TV show, as well as focusing on the relationship between Lois and Clark, it was actually intended to eventually feature their wedding. But because the TV wedding was happening at a particular time, the execs at DC decided to postpone the comic wedding until it could happen concurrently with the wedding in the TV show. To be honest, and a lot of people realize this, it was to pad this out and to bridge the intervening gap that the actual entire Death of Superman, Funeral for a Friend, Reign of the Superman, etc. story arc was conceived. Anyway, after the death and return of Superman, another idea which was used to bide up time was to split up Superman, or rather Clark Kent, and Lois Lane, and that occurred in Action Comics 720. Um, Actually, in Superman 115, Lois even leaves the US to become a foreign correspondent. I mean, you can't put more of a nail in the coffin of the relationship than that. That's because at this point, the plan was to still have a longer story arc, which eventually, in a very slow, tortuous way, would result in Lois coming to realize she still has feelings for Clark Kent, Superman, obviously, eventually returning to the US and marrying him, and this would sync up perfectly with the Lois and Clark TV show and the wedding there. However, classic, these plans were then changed again when the producers of the TV show decided to have their wedding take place earlier than they'd previously intended. And so they decided to do it in season 4 of the TV show in its third episode rather than having it as an end of season finale. As a consequence, DC then had to reschedule their plots, basically meaning that a lot of the whole thing about Lois's quest for herself and so on traveling around got really wrapped up in a really rushed way. So if you were reading Superman number 118, which is like the issue before this, you'll see it just wraps up so quickly, it's ridiculous. To further complicate things, obviously we've just come out of the Final Night DC event. Now, minor spoiler warning, but given that it's an event where the sun disappears, as you can imagine, one of the short-term ramifications of the event is a temporary loss of Superman's powers. Now, he was supposed to regain that in the subsequent power struggle story arc, which you can see here right below Honeymoon in Hawaii. Um, but as a result of the short-term kind of schedule change, basically it means that Superman doesn't have his powers during the wedding, which actually leads to quite an interesting dynamic with the married couple. Anyway, it's just all a bit strange in terms of the timing. Also, final quick flash fact for you: despite many claims to the contrary, this is not the first time Superman and Lois have actually gotten married. I mean, there were loads of dream sequences and things like that where they've gotten married in the past. But actually, Superman and Lois originally got married in Action Comics 484 in an Earth 2 story, which I guess, come to think of it, is Elseworlds. But anyway, back to the map here. We've got Honeymoon in Hawaii. The first issue is Superman 118, which has a massive wrapping up of all Lois's kind of angst and misgivings about the wedding. Then you have the wedding album, which is actually a good issue. A lot goes on in it, so it's worth checking out. That's then followed by the Adventures of Superman 541. A quick point about this issue. In this issue, Lois references a miniseries from 1994 called Metropolis SCU, which is like Metropolis Special Crimes Unit or Super Crimes Unit, I forget. I have read it, and actually it's quite an interesting tale revolving around Maggie Sawyer more than it's revolving around Lois Lane. But there's no need to read this in order to understand the Honeymoon in Hawaii arc. The only thing it really explains is the fact that in this arc, Honeymoon in Hawaii, you realize that Lois is a total badass. It's kind of crazy. I mean, the next issue here, Action Comics 728, and then you have Superman Man of Steel issue 63. That finishes out this honeymoon, but overall, this honeymoon was fucking mental. Lois is basically Arnie from the movie Commando. Like, she's just insanely hard as nails in this story arc, which is kind of jarring and strange. But I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. Can't fault that. Let's have a quick triangle check. Superman Man of Steel 63 is triangle number 50. The next story arc is the one that I've called Power Struggle. So this is the one where Superman's meant to be getting his powers back. And this starts off with triangle number 119. A quick triangle check here. You'll notice this is now triangle number 1 because the triangles have renumbered. Something I'll also point out about Superman 119 is that it does mention the passing reference to the Superman Aliens miniseries, which also came out around about the same time. Feel free to totally ignore reading that. It is not essential or even important at all. Following that, we then have Adventures of Superman 542, Action Comics 729, and Man of Steel issue 64. Quick triangle check, Man of Steel issue 64 is triangle number 4. Interestingly about Power Struggle, every issue is labeled Power Struggle on the cover, but doesn't have a numbering. So even though it's got a very clear sequence in terms of the triangle numbers, it doesn't actually say Power Struggle Part 1 or Part 2 or Part 3 or something, which is slightly odd and slightly annoying, but not a big deal. We then have another brief arc I like to call connective issues. It's just two random, relatively standalone issues. The first one, and I'm going to scroll all the way over here. The first one is Superman Man of Tomorrow number 7, which as we can see is triangle number 5. Let me scroll all the way back. And what we have as the next issue is Superman 120, which is triangle 6. If you're wondering where the Man of Tomorrow series came from all of a sudden, it's because you didn't watch the last video in this series, so please do go back and watch that. Next up, we have a story arc called Revenge Squad. This is just 3 issues. Adventure of Superman 543, Action Comics 730, and Man of Steel 65. Man of Steel 65 being Triangle 9, of course. Next up, we have another connective issue arc. It starts off with Superman issue 121. This is an excellent issue, by the way. We then have Adventures of Superman 544. We then have Action Comics 731. We then have, do you know what? I'm going to zoom out. There you go. We can see Superman, Man of Tomorrow. Sorry, I should have done that before, really. So Superman, Man of Tomorrow, number 8. We then have Man of Steel, number 66. And we then have Superman 122. Next up is an arc that I think we can quite easily call Superman Blue for those of you that remember Electric Superman. This is really straightforward. We've got Adventures of Superman 545, Action Comics 732, Man of Steel 67, Superman 123, or rather 123, sorry, Adventures of Superman 546, Action Comics 733, Man of Steel 68, and then Superman 124. Quick triangle check, that is triangle number 23. Following this, we have a story arc called Crisis in Kandor. This, again, relatively straightforward. Adventure of Superman 547, Action Comics 734, Man of Steel 69, and then Superman 125. Let's do a quick triangle check. That's triangle number 27. That then takes us to a whole slew of connective issues. Let's start at the top. We have Adventures of Superman 548. We then have Action Comics 735. And we then have Man of Steel number 70. I will point out that these 3 issues, the ones we just mentioned above, are an untitled but reasonably connected arc about the character Savior. But they're all still relatively disconnected as well. There's kind of a theme running through them, but don't worry about it too much. I just thought I'd mention that. Next up, we have Superman 126, Adventures of Superman 549, Action Comics 736, Man of Steel 71, and Superman 127. Then we have Adventures of Superman 550. I'm just going to pause here for a second. This mentions another miniseries from 1994. In fact, this is called the Guardian of Metropolis miniseries, but you don't need to read it. In fact, I would recommend you don't read it because it's terrible. It's got virtually it's got no Superman in it. Superman's not in it. Just take that from me. Instead, Guardian is in it, and it's totally focused on the Newsboy Legion, which I personally found incredibly annoying. Anyway, the last couple of connective issues, we've got Action Comics 737, and then, because it's a 5-week month, we have Man of Tomorrow, issue number 9. Now, this is triangle number 38, as you can see there. That takes us to the very last part, which is the Genesis tie-ins. So these issues are essential parts of the Genesis event, and frankly, they make no sense outside of that. So the issues are really simple. It's Man of Steel 72, Superman 128, and then Adventures of Superman 551. The triangle numbers do continue, so you've got 39, 40, and 41. But frankly, do not read them by themselves. If you're going to read these 3 issues, you need to read the Genesis event. But worry not, that is what we're going to be looking at next time. And there we have it. In case you're interested in knowing where these resources are, so the guides, the maps, and so on, they're all available on my website. They're all available for free. You can go into the website, which is nogodsorkings.com, and download the Google Sheet for the Superman reading order, or you can go on the website and look at these reading maps for all the various DC events, and a whole bunch of other things I've got on there to your heart's desire. If, however, you are interested in a written version of this guide, then it is available on Amazon. I've recently just self-published it. It is the cheapest possible tier you can get on Amazon. So it's 79 pence UK, 99 cents American, and so on. It's free if you're on Kindle Unlimited, and there is a free sample on the website as well. The reason I put this onto Amazon is kind of a proof of concept. I'm interested to see if people are interested in the written guides, whether or not people want to pick them up. And also, it's a good way for me to bat off all the people that are going to be in the comments asking for a Batman guide. If you want a Batman guide, I don't really particularly have any interest in doing one, but I will do one if this book gets 500 reviews. So if this book gets 500 5-star reviews, then I will start doing a Batman reading guide at some point. I don't think that's going to happen, but there we are. Of course, feel free to support the channel by picking this up. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, the best way to support the channel is by picking up one of my other books, which isn't a non-fiction reading guide. It's actually a fictional, completely original superhero story. It's prose, so not a comic or words, but it's about superheroes in just a really interesting kind of post-apocalyptic dystopic idea. The first 4 books of the series are out, and if you want to support, please pick that up. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay classy.